David, you put great emphasis on the fact that many of the religious traditions, both Eastern and Western, focus on the absolute being as this concept of God, and in that they're very similar. I grant that, but if you go anywhere beyond that, you have extreme not only diversity but contradictory ideas and comments that can't be allegorized away. There are fundamental differences between many of these religions. So how do you deal with that? You put great emphasis on the commonality of religion, but what about the absolute contradictions?
Well, I never take any religion as a closed system of propositions, every one of which is true or true in the same way. And that's the way you think about religion. I mean, I think of all religions, including Christianity, as cultural artifacts that express truths or fail to express them in ways determined as much by cultural history as anything else. It's not the case, by the way, that after you move away from the basic affirmation that God is the absolute, that you immediately run into irreconcilable differences. There are all sorts of realms of experience, of devotional experience, mystical experience, and other sorts of affirmations about moral life where you find also commonality of experience and concept. But we're talking about the human experience of the infinite source of all that is. There's no way that could be reducible to a single set of internally consistent propositions that exclude all other approaches. And these approaches are going to be mythological, spiritual, philosophical, ethical. They're going to contradict one another in some details and affirm one another in others. I believe that they, among the traditions that are serious traditions, not the kind of religion you might make up if you were trying to sell a certain product rather than the spiritual life, that yes, they can all converge upon the same truths with all of the fallibility that every human approach to truth exhibits, the same way that different schools, even in the sciences, are going to diverge from one another. Now, ideally, we say, well, at some point, there will be a theoretical breakthrough that will either reconcile the differences in the sciences or show that one theoretical path was sterile. Well, in a sense, that's true also of religious experience. But it's just not going to be within the realm of empirical investigation. But yes, many different religions can be true in the sense that they are speaking of the truth in the best way that the cultural tradition to which they belong allows them to do so, while at the same time differing from one another on specific affirmations which may be right or wrong.
Let me take a very concrete example that to me is not a cultural thing, but a very fundamental one, and that is the Christian claim that God is somehow a Trinity. And there is much philosophical discussion of what that means in terms of individual persons within the one Godhead, and how you have one God with three expressions, personalities, social, economic, all different kinds of things. Yeah. You can't reconcile that with a Vedantic, a Hindu monotheistic God.
Actually, I can reconcile it with certain schools of Vedanta. It would be harder, say, with certain schools of Islamic thought, or with Islam, where it seems to be a heretical statement. And again, one has to clarify what you're affirming when you affirm a doctrine like the Trinity. On the one hand, it is a specific doctrine to Christianity in that it is a hermeneutical discovery made as the result of what is believed to have been revealed in the course of a history, and that history involves a certain ecclesial and communal experience of salvation that's explicable only in terms. Ultimately, they decided of a Nicene interpretation of the New Testament and Old Testament. True. On the other hand, when you get into the metaphysical affirmations that are then used to try to clarify what we mean by thinking of God as both one and yet related, suddenly we find ourselves in a metaphysical territory where there are other faiths that say similar things. As I said, it's a very venerable Vedantic and Bhaktic definition of God to describe him as Sat Chit Ananda, being consciousness, bliss, in understanding that as being at once the infinite wellspring of being, but then also reflective awareness of self in a second moment, and consummation in a state of perfect love and bliss, Ananda.
But that's radically
which is
different
no,
than three
it's actually
individual personalities that all have
there
those
aren't the
characteristics.
personalities. The hypostases, translated as personae, but I mean that's already a difficult category, and if it's radically different, then it's radically different. Not, I mean, from the way you characterize it, it's not radically different from the way Augustine at places talks about the Trinity, the way Gregory of Nyssa talks about it. When you're talking about what metaphysical assertions can attach to this doctrine, which is, not that there are three individual psychological subjectivities that exist in a confederacy. That's not the notion of the Trinity, even if it's crudely
A lot of people believe that.
But
Is that
that's
right? Don't a lot of people believe exactly what you just said?
They may do, but if they do, then that's contrary again to the doctrine as explicitly stated.
Well, I mean, you do have Jesus talking about my Father, and that certainly
Sure,
seems...
and you have Krishna praying to Vishnu. That's, I mean, this in and of itself is a very, I'll admit, delicate set of problems. But, it's even questionable whether the word persons there is ideal. You have to remember that's a Latin translation, not of prosopa, which would mean basically the same thing and was occasionally used in Trinitarian language in the East, but of hypostasis, which is a wonderfully vague word. It just means substance in a way, or substrate, or underlying reality. What is clearly not the case, and you can see this in the whole history of Christian thought from the early patristic period right up through the 20th and 21st centuries in theology, is that what is not the case theologically is that we're asserting that there are three individual subjects here. There is a structure of relation in the Godhead, which is on the one hand a profound unity and at the same time relationality of Father, Son, and Spirit. You find that same thinking, as I say, in other traditions.
Can you have relationality with one individual, or
No.
one absolute being?
No, that would be, I'm sorry, what do you mean, absolute?
If God is absolute being,
Uh-huh.
and in that there is relationality, can you have relationality within one absolute being? Isn't that sort of nonsensical?
Why not? No, why?
It
It's
means
not.
I'm talking to myself and I have a relationship with myself.
Well, again, in your case, being a finite psychological subject, and you
You've
started
noticed that.
talking to yourself, well, I'm wondering what it's like. You have to tell me. But yeah, obviously, if you're talking to yourself, but again, God is not a big self, that the claim, look, even in your own experience of your conscious acts, you're aware that there's a depth. This is something Augustine very beautifully uses as a metaphor, just a metaphor of the Trinity, a depth, which in Latin he calls memoria, but he doesn't just mean memory of the past. That means the whole depth of the mind in encompassing everything it knows and is, which expresses itself also to itself in a word. It's conscious of itself as expression, manifestation, and it knows itself in the satisfaction of that knowledge in a kind of love. Now, why is he using metaphors like that? Well, that's obviously not a metaphor based on the notion of three guys, all of whom is a complete psychological self in himself, getting together and saying, let's be God. He's talking about the very structure of being as also an infinite act of consciousness and love. So yeah, doctrinally, the language of the Trinity is unique to Christianity in that it is specifically the language about these historical events and what is revealed in them. Metaphysically, the ideas are not alien to other ways to other traditions and how. Ibn Arabi, a Muslim, I said, problems, but even he says that God is, what would it be? Wujud, Wishtan, Waj, he is being, consciousness, bliss. He uses that same triplet and expresses it in ways that would not be repugnant to Augustine. Now, he certainly is a good Muslim, not asserting that God is threefold. He's wondering what a unity that is a unity at once of being and consciousness, that both knows and is.
Is there a difference in understanding the Trinity between the Eastern Orthodox tradition and the Western Christianity?
Well, you see, at different times there have been. I think more in recent years, dogmatically, Western scholarship has tended to say that the Eastern tradition is closer to the patristic and biblical language. That is, that an emphasis on just this sort of structure. That is, when we use the word Father, we're speaking of the fountainhead of. There was a time when in Western discourse, perhaps, this sort of the vitality, this as a definable structure of the moments of that unity wasn't as well articulated in the divine essence, in its relation to the relations of the persons wasn't as clearly articulated as it was in the patristic period. I don't know. In the end, since it's a very difficult language, all sorts of differences are going to arise. But I would say on the whole, no. On the Trinity, there isn't that big a divergence in language.